You're complaining about Google Maps? They traveled thousands of kilometers without a compass, a map, or a single street sign. Just heat, sand, and the endless horizon. The desert shows no mercy. Yet the Bedouins didn't just survive its vastness. They mastered it, navigating where others would fall, holding on to knowledge we've long forgotten. Who were the Bedouins? Nomads who lived for generations in some of the most unforgiving places on earth. The deserts of Arabia, North Africa, Sinai, and Syria. Their lives weren't just a struggle against nature. They formed an alliance with it. They didn't fight the sand. They learned to read it, to hear its secrets. And in that all-consuming silence, they didn't just survive. They raised families, raised children, and traveled hundreds of kilometers without leaving a trace. They knew secrets, the kind that could still save lives in the age of climate crisis. In the heart of the desert, there are no roads, no signs, no permanent landmarks. The landscape shifts with every wind, and the dunes you passed yesterday are gone today. But the Bedouins knew the truth. You can't rely on the land. You can only survive if you trust the sky. Their navigation wasn't about memorizing a route. It was about reading the universe. Every part of the sky was a guidepost, and they saw things in it that modern people don't even have the language for. By day, they read the sun. It wasn't just a source of heat. It was a clock and a compass. Its arc across the sky told them the time with astonishing precision. They could measure the passage of an hour by the length of their own shadows, and they could tell you it was 10:45 a.m. or 2:15 p.m. without a watch. They would even use a simple stick stuck vertically in the sand, noting the position of its shadow to track their direction. As the sun moved, the shadow's path was a clear, unalterable line. In the morning, the shadow would stretch to the west. At noon, it would shrink to almost nothing directly beneath the stick, and in the afternoon, it would lengthen to the east. This allowed them to orient themselves and maintain a consistent bearing. They didn't just watch the sun, they watched the light itself. The way the light hit a dune or colored the horizon gave them a sense of place and time. They could tell if a storm was brewing hours away, just by the specific haze in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere that heralded a wind shift and a drop in pressure. The intensity of the light, its color temperature, and the way it filtered through dust in the air were all parts of an unwritten, but universally understood, meteorological code. At night, the stars were their map, a celestial grid of constellations that provided a fixed, reliable guide in an otherwise shifting world. The North Star, or Al-Jah, was the cornerstone. It remained fixed in the northern sky, a constant point of reference no matter the season. But they knew dozens of other stars and star patterns, using them for more than just a single directional point. The Bedouins saw constellations as landmarks. For example, they might say, "We will travel toward the tail of the Great Bear until the two brothers pass the horizon." This wasn't just poetic language, it was a precise navigational instruction. They could determine not only a general direction, but also their exact position relative to a known destination by observing the height of specific constellations above the horizon. This skill required them to know the movement of the stars throughout the night and across the seasons. They understood the celestial mechanics of the night sky better than many modern astronomers. This wasn't guesswork, it was a science perfected over thousands of years. They could even navigate on cloudy nights by the position of the moon or the direction of the wind, which they could feel on their skin and see in the movement of the sand. When the sky was fully overcast and the stars were hidden, they relied on secondary indicators like the moon's phase and position. A sliver moon in the west could be a crucial clue, a faint glow behind a cloud a subtle hint of direction. Their heads were their instruments. They could tell the exact time and direction without a single tool, simply by feeling the sun's warmth and the wind's direction on their skin. A Bedouin's brain was a biological GPS, one that never lost its signal. This deep, instinctual connection to the environment was the result of a lifetime of training, of observing and internalizing the subtle shifts of the natural world. They didn't need an app to tell them where to go. They simply felt their way there, guided by an ancient, unspoken language of light and shadow, wind and stars. While the sky was the compass, the ground was a constant source of information, a living diary of the desert's history. The Bedouins didn't just walk on the sand. They read it like a book, understanding that every grain, every ripple, and every stone held a clue. To the uninitiated, the desert floor is a monotonous, featureless expanse. To a Bedouin, it was a complex tapestry of signs and symbols, a library of ancient and current information. Every rock, every dune, and every patch of vegetation had a story to tell. A certain type of rock formation might indicate a nearby wadi, a dry riverbed, which could lead to water. These wadis were often carved by flash floods that brought water to the surface, and while they were usually dry, they were a sign of the life-giving forces that existed just beneath the surface. The color of the sand could tell them its composition. Red sand often meant iron, while white sand was a sign of quartz and a lack of other minerals. This helped them understand the terrain and predict what was ahead, like the stability of the ground or the presence of a nearby salt flat. The direction of the wind and its intensity were etched into the sand in the form of ripples. They could look at these ripple marks, called dune migration patterns, and tell you which direction the wind had been blowing, how long ago, and whether it was a gentle breeze or a strong gale. This gave them an invisible map of recent weather patterns, allowing them to anticipate changes and avoid getting caught in a storm. But the most important clues were tracks, not just their own, but those of animals. The desert floor was a busy highway of life and information. The tracks of a camel could lead to a source of water. The trail of a gazelle might point to a rare patch of greenery, and the burrow of a small rodent could suggest an underground source of moisture. To the untrained eye, these tracks were meaningless scratches. To a Bedouin, they were a comprehensive data set. They could tell not only what animal had passed, but how long ago, what its condition was, and where it was headed. For example, the depth of a camel's footprint could indicate its weight and, therefore, whether it was carrying a heavy load. The spacing of a gazelle's hoof prints could reveal if it was moving at a leisurely pace or running in fear. A slight limp in a footprint could tell them an animal was injured and thus easier to hunt. This skill, known as aather, was a highly respected art form. They could follow a single animal's tracks for days, even in conditions where the sand was constantly shifting. The Bedouins also used their knowledge of plants to find their way and to survive. A single, hardy plant thriving in a seemingly barren landscape was a beacon of hope. They knew that certain plants only grew where water was close to the surface. The presence of a small bush could mean a well was just a few feet away, even if it was buried beneath the sand. They also used the plants for sustenance, knowing which ones were edible and which were poisonous, a critical skill in a land with no supermarkets or grocery stores. This symbiotic relationship with the environment meant they didn't just pass through the desert, they became a part of its delicate ecosystem, and they left no trace of their own. They learned to walk without disturbing the sand, so that their tracks would be erased by the wind within hours. This wasn't about hiding, it was about moving in harmony with the environment, leaving it as they found it. Their journey was silent, and their path was invisible. This philosophy of minimizing impact extended to their entire existence. They would set up camp in a way that left no lasting footprint, ensuring that their temporary home in the vast desert was just that, temporary. This made their journey a quiet, seamless flow through the landscape, a testament to their deep respect for the unforgiving land that sustained them. A Bedouin's most valuable possession wasn't a tool or a garment, it was his camel. The camel wasn't just a beast of burden. It was a partner, a life support system, and a walking map. To the Bedouin, the camel was a member of the family, a trusted companion whose wisdom and instinct were often the difference between life and death. This relationship was forged over centuries of shared hardship, and it transformed the animal from a simple carrier into a sophisticated navigational tool. Camels possess an innate sense of direction that scientists still struggle to understand. They can memorize routes and can sense water from miles away. When a Bedouin needed to find a distant oasis, he would often trust his camel to lead the way, knowing the animal's internal compass was often more reliable than a human's. This incredible ability is believed to be rooted in a deep-seated biological mechanism, perhaps a form of magnetoreception or a highly sensitive olfactory sense that can detect the faint scent of moisture on the wind. Bedouins would let a camel loose near the end of a long, waterless journey, and the animal would, with a focused certainty, walk directly toward the nearest water source. This was not a gamble. It was a fundamental part of their travel strategy. They understood that the camel's purpose was not merely to carry them, but to guide them. But the camel also acted as a living sensor. If a camel started to breathe faster or showed signs of distress, it wasn't just a sign of heat. It was a signal that the environment was reaching a critical point, a warning that danger, whether from heat stroke or a coming sandstorm, was imminent. This allowed the Bedouins to find shade and seek shelter long before a human would feel the warning signs. The camel's physiology, with its ability to store vast amounts of water and regulate its body temperature, made it an excellent early warning system. By observing their camel's behavior, the flick of an ear, a slight shift in posture, a change in breathing, the Bedouin could read the environment as clearly as if it were a weather report. This deep, nonverbal communication was a critical survival skill. The camel's comfort was directly tied to the Bedouins' survival, and they treated them with immense care and respect, often giving the animals water before they drank any themselves. They also used their camels as a measurement tool. The distance they traveled wasn't measured in miles or kilometers, but in the number of camel steps, or in the time it took for a camel to chew its cud a certain number of times. They could tell you a journey was 2 days by camel, a unit of measurement as precise as any modern GPS. This system of measurement, known as masafa, was based on the animal's steady, predictable pace. A camel's stride is long and consistent, making it a reliable unit of distance. A day's journey was often defined by the time it took to travel from one known watering hole to the next, a unit of measure that was both practical and deeply ingrained in their culture. This created a mental map of the desert that was not based on abstract units, but on a tangible, living rhythm. The route was not just a line on a map. It was a series of known points, landmarks, and the time it took to travel between them. The camel was also a mobile fortress. Its thick hide provided insulation from the sun's scorching heat, and its hump, a store of fat and energy, was a reserve of life. Bedouins would often travel in the heat of the day, using their camels as a living shield, a source of shade that could be moved at a moment's notice. The animal's large, flat feet were perfectly adapted to the shifting sand, allowing it to walk effortlessly where a human would sink. This was a partnership born of necessity and perfected over millennia. The camel provided the strength and the innate sense of direction, and the Bedouin provided the guidance, the knowledge of the stars, and the wisdom to read the signs of the ground. Together, they formed an unbeatable team, a testament to the power of a symbiotic relationship in a world where every advantage mattered. The Bedouin's life was inextricably linked to the camels. They lived by its rhythm, traveled by its pace, and survived because of its wisdom. The camel was not just a means of transport. It was the very heart of their nomadic existence, a living map and a compass that never failed. Ultimately, survival in the desert didn't belong to the strongest. It belonged to the calmest. A Bedouin's mind was their most crucial navigational tool. They learned to ignore the panic that comes with being lost and to instead focus on observation. In the desert, anxiety meant a spike in adrenaline, a racing heart, and a flood of sweat, all of which could lead to rapid dehydration and death. Calm wasn't just a personality trait, it was a physical survival tool. The Bedouin learned to stay cool not just in their minds, but in their bodies, controlling heat through breath, posture, and thought. In the desert, time wasn't measured by clocks. It was measured by the movement of the sun and the behavior of the wind. A wrong turn wasn't a failure. It was an opportunity to read the signs and adjust. The Bedouin didn't try to power through. They slowed down, listened, and watched. They were masters of patience, knowing that a rash decision could mean death. This was a psychological discipline honed over generations. They understood that the desert was a living entity and that it demanded patience and respect. When faced with an unknown route, they would often stop, sit in the shade, and simply observe. They would watch the subtle movements of the wind, the flight of a bird, the way a shadow fell across a rock. These observations, seemingly small and insignificant, would provide the clues they needed to find their way. This deliberate stillness was an act of profound wisdom, a rejection of the modern world's frantic pace in favor of a quiet, mindful awareness. They carried the mental map of the entire desert in their minds, not as lines on a page, but as a collection of stories, memories, and sensory experiences. They could remember a specific rock from a decade ago and use it to find their way. This wasn't just memory. It was a deeply ingrained spatial awareness, a second nature. They would use mnemonic devices, oral histories, and songs to pass on this knowledge from one generation to the next. A journey wasn't just a physical act. It was a narrative, a story of the people who had traveled it before. They would remember the path by the way the sand felt under their feet, the specific curve of a dune, the scent of the air near a hidden water source. This was a kind of deep mapping, a form of navigation that was less about location and more about a profound, almost spiritual connection to the land. This mental map was never static. It was constantly being updated and refined with every new journey, every new observation. The Bedouins never tried to conquer the desert. It wasn't an enemy, it was an environment, one you didn't adapt to, but became a part of. The sand, the wind, and the sun, they were always stronger. But they didn't strike first. The Bedouin didn't battle them. He became invisible to them. No sound, no sudden movement, just another shape on the horizon, moving with a silent, invisible purpose. Their psychology was one of discipline, refined into instinct. They learned to control their fear, their thirst, and their fatigue, knowing that these emotions were just another form of heat, another threat to their survival. They were masters of their own bodies and minds, and this mastery was the ultimate key to their success in a world that would otherwise have swallowed them whole. They learned to be quiet, to be still, and to listen, not just to the sounds of the desert, but to the silence within themselves.